Hi, fantasy readers. This is Corinne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. Today's story is part 1 of 2, and I realize I've started out this season with a lot of longer short stories that are split over 2 episodes. I should probably pay more attention and spread them out, but when a good story comes my way, I'm not going to pass it up. So I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry that you're getting so many of these. This particular story is for those who love dragons, hope, and traditions turned on their heads, which is probably all of you, so again, I'm not sorry. It's written by M.H. Woodscourt, who has spent more than 2 decades devotedly writing fantasy, which makes her more dragon than human. All of her fantasy worlds connect with each other in the broad Mithrin universe, forged with great love and no small measure of blood, sweat, and tears. When she's not writing, she's napping or reading a book with a mug of hot cocoa close at hand, while her quirky cat, Winter, nibbles her nose. Today's narrator is Paeter Frandsen, host of Christian Geek Central. Stick around to the end or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from both the author and the narrator. For now, please enjoy The Minstrel and the Dragon, Part 1, by M.H. Woodscourt.
At least it was a beautiful day to die. Given the circumstances, a snowstorm would have been far more depressing. As it was, the twittering birds in the trees, the rustling of the green leaves, and the fragrance of the pink blossoms bobbing on the wind made a kind of chipper music that battled Thanin's fear. The wagon wheels rolling along the rutted road jarred him often, tied up as he was in the wagon bed. Behind the wagon rode a single guard on horseback, there to make certain that the driver delivered Thanin to his final destination. He hadn't expected to die today. Nothing in the air had indicated danger. Nothing in the clouds had predicted it. He'd only been passing through a small town, plucking at his lute, and happened to smile at the mayor's daughter. Why had no one warned him of the danger? Thanin knew something of overprotective fathers. Not because he was a lascivious sort, but because domineering parents saw danger around every corner, especially from comely young men. Thanin had learned early on not to approach eligible and affluent young women, even to ask for directions, but he'd never expected that a smile would sentence him to death. And certainly not at the claws of a dragon. At the end of the tree-lined lane, the wagon slowed, then turned off onto what could barely be called a road at all. It was a narrow path, pitted with puddles where last autumn's leaves had gathered for their funeral rites. Apparently, this road was used only once a year for a single purpose, the same purpose Thanin was part of today. He twisted onto his knees in the wagon, ignoring the bite of the ropes keeping his wrists bound to the driver's seat. Thanin stared ahead into the growing shadows of the deep woods. With every beat of the horse's hooves, his heart quickened and his breath shortened. "Please, blessed Nijal, I don't want to die," he prayed silently. But Thanin didn't expect a miracle. He probably didn't deserve one. Did runaways warrant a miracle? The mayor hadn't even granted Thanin a priest to consult before the end. Apparently, anyone who smiled at his daughter was too much of a heretic. The gloom of the woods grew to its deepest point, then fell away all at once at the edge of a sunlit clearing where water rushed in a torrent like a dragon's roar. Or maybe it was the real thing. Squinting against the sudden light, Thanin spotted the source of the roar. A waterfall cascaded down into a deep, vibrant pool which in turn spilled over into a stream flowing into the woods. In the mid-morning glow, the cliff embracing the waterfall was vibrantly green with moss. The jostling slowed. The wagoner clicked his tongue. Then the wagon came to an abrupt stop, knocking Thanin against the seat. "Cut him loose," the guard on horseback ordered. Wordlessly, the driver twisted around on the wagon seat and used a dull knife to slice through Thanin's cords. Thanin took a moment to rub his raw wrists, then glanced up at the guard who glowered at him impatiently. "Get down!" He obeyed as quickly as his numb legs allowed, which was admittedly not very fast. The guard lowered his wicked-looking spear in Thanen's direction as an incentive. Thanen caught up his loot and scrambled from the wagon, nearly face-planting. He crunched leaves and twigs under his worn boots and smiled weakly at the guard. "At your service, good sir," he said with a cheerful lilt in his voice. Offering a shallow bow, he then straightened and shook back his shoulder-length chestnut-brown hair. The guard rolled his eyes, then gestured with his spear toward the pool of frothing water. "Your new home." Thanen surveyed the clearing, noting for the first time a heap of large animal bones near the water's edge. Or were those animals after all? Blood drained from his face, and cold fingers of fear traced his spine, but he only smiled again at the guard and said in the strongest voice he could manage, "It's rather lovely, isn't it?" The guard scoffed, swinging back up into his saddle. He barked in order to move out, then wheeled his stallion around and moved at a double pace from the clearing, back into the woods. The wagoner was right on the horse's hooves. Within a few moments, horse and rider, as well as the wagon, disappeared from view. The last of the rattling wheels faded into silence. Thanen stared into the woods, while the reality of his situation settled into his bones. Birds chirped in the trees, which he found strange considering everything. Clutching his loot to his chest, Thanen slowly turned on his heels to face the roaring falls. This was it, his final resting place. In a way, it was better than the potter's field he'd expected at the end of his life. Then again, he hadn't expected to die so soon. 26 years was awfully young when he contemplated it. Drawing a bracing breath, Thanen allowed curiosity to push him to the water's edge. He stared into the pool, surprised to find fish darting around beneath its surface. Why birds and fish thought it was a good idea to be so near a dragon's lair, he couldn't begin to fathom. Then again, he was still there, rather than running through the trees or trying to catch himself up to the wagon and beg for his life like a fool. Perhaps the wildlife had come to terms with their inevitable end as much as he seemed to have. "After all, there are worse deaths than being eaten alive, aren't there?" He laughed at himself, noting the thread of panic in the sound. Who could really compare notes to determine which death was worse than another? Certainly, the dead didn't seem willing to weigh in on the matter. And why would they? It was no great concern to anyone on the other side of death anymore. Soon it won't matter to me either. He studied the waterfall, wondering if the dragon lived in a hidden cave behind the cascade. That made the most sense, and legend supported it. Should he investigate, or remain here and await his doom like the patient soul he usually was? It hardly seemed to matter, and yet he liked to know which direction death was coming from if he had a choice. He'd half expected the dragon to meet him with open jaws, eager for a meaty morsel, but perhaps they were nocturnal creatures. All he knew about dragons came from songs and poems, and like any sensible person, he'd preferred to keep it that way. Too bad now he would face one head-on and not live to sing the tale. Thanen decided to wait. He knew better than to think he could outrun the dragon. His scent was everywhere. Besides, when he'd arrived at the village, the folk there had apparently been debating who to send to satiate the dragon's appetite. If Thanen fled and the dragon didn't eat him, then the village would be destroyed in a single breath of death. "That's not half bad, Thanen. Breath of death." He cracked a smile. It dissolved almost at once. Now wasn't the time to compose a song. "What is it time for?" "Sitting," he said aloud, startled by his own voice. "So, sit down and wait, half-wit. Think through what you know." He heeded his advice, found a bit of soft moss near the water's edge, and sat down cross-legged. He tenderly placed his lute beside him, then closed his brown eyes to enjoy the faint mist of the waterfall drifting over his face. "Now, Thanen, what do we know about dragons?" He opened his eyes to study the cascading water and to keep an eye on the potential hidden cave. According to some legends, they can speak, which means they can reason. He paused. Some people he knew were very adept at the first point, while lacking any talent with the second. Clearing his throat, he tried again. Perhaps. That was the best amendment he could manage. Which means you have one chance to state your case and convince the dreadful monster you deserve to live. After all, you're not even a villager. Surely substituting with you is some kind of cheat or crime, right? Thanen cringed. Even he recognized how thin a stretch that was. What did a giant beast care where his sustenance came from, so long as it tasted good? If that doesn't work, he said matter-of-factly, then you're mutton. That's all there is to it. And to be fair, your mother never thought you'd amount to even that, so really, it could be much worse. He rested his hand against the lute and rubbed his fingers across the smooth wood. At least it serves the world in some way, feeding hungry dragons, unlike your useless music, eh? The words stung, even so many years later. He suspected that even if he miraculously managed to slay the dragon and get himself knighted, it wouldn't be enough for that woman. He really should let go of those last clinging vestiges of her memory. Sighing, Thanen took up his lute and plucked a few notes, humming along. He had a half-finished melody caught in his fingers, and no words to accompany it. It was the same piece of music he'd carried around since running away from his father's forge. Thanen had written and sung a few songs since, but his listeners preferred folk songs they knew, so he'd not written anything original in 3 years. Whenever he tried, he always came back to the same refrain, to no avail. He was as sorry a minstrel as he had been a blacksmith's apprentice. Maybe being eaten is the only worthwhile thing I'll ever do. At least it will spare one village for another year. A wren tweeted in the lowest bough of the nearest alder tree. Thanen whistled at the little bird, then went on humming his sweet, wordless tune. If not for impending death, it would be a rare, perfect spring day. Warm, quiet, soft, peaceful. Even the roar of the falls added to the stillness of the green world. Thanen admired the greens around him. So many hues, so many kinds, and so many fragrances to accompany the feast for his eyes. For several moments, he didn't notice that the woods were growing even quieter. The wren cut her song short, taking to the air like she was affronted. Thanen stopped fingering his lute. Chills climbed his arms. He licked his lips, the song lodged in his throat. Did he imagine the ground beneath him trembling? Did the falls throw a large shadow across the pool? Was the dragon emerging from his cave? Setting aside his lute, Thanen drew a breath. Slowly he stood, tugged his jerkin down, then rubbed his palms against it. Every instinct insisted he run, but no human could outrun a dragon. No point in risking a broken limb. Something was definitely moving behind the waterfall. Thanen glanced around for a stick or a rock, any kind of makeshift weapon. He wouldn't use his lute. It was his only possession, and he loved it more than his life. The something stepped around the watery cascade, but it was much too small and much too human to be a dragon. Thanen's jaw dropped. She was exquisite. Long white blonde hair flowed like water down her back, and she was gowned in glittering silver. Her skin was nearly white, and she was willowy and graceful. The young woman glided toward Thanen, around the pool, her gown trailing across rocks and moss. Bare toes peeped from under her hem. "By all the spirits," Thanen whispered, then fell into a bow he was certain was stiff and awkward. "Lady fair, what brings you to—" And then he understood. She must be a village sacrifice, just like him. Rising, Thanen tried to think fast. This changed everything. He couldn't remain and allow himself to be chomped now, not if she was in danger too. Swallowing, he tried again. "Greetings, fair lady. I am Thanen, Minstrel of Theod, your humble servant. She paused a few feet away, smiling. Hello, Thanen. I am called Rinshera. He whispered the name, committing the beautiful sound to memory. Have you been here long? Have you seen the dragon? Is he sleeping? Lady Rinshera's smile deepened. In a way, yes. And I have been here for several years. Thanen's mind stuttered. I don't understand. You were sent from the village to the south, the one called Trendelwyn? She asked, looking him up and down. You are not very maiden-like. Warmth rose in Thanen's cheeks. Yes, I mean, no, I'm not. Which you already surmised, obviously. He halted, collecting himself. She remained still, letting him. What I mean is I was sent in a maiden's stead. Ah, that makes sense. There is only one eligible maiden left in that village. The others have already been sent away by sensible parents to spare them, and the mayor is unlikely to sacrifice his own beloved daughter, don't you think? The links connected in Thanen's head. Ah, that's why he was so eager to accuse me of harassment. I merely smiled at the lass. It was perfectly innocent. Nothing is innocent with Mayor Groton. Thanen grunted an answer, unwilling to commit to accusations when he didn't really know the parties involved. Besides, whatever the mayor's motivations, the damage was now done. I'm not as alone as I thought, however. He considered the beautiful woman standing before him. You say you've been here for several years. Surely you don't mean... I mean I have lived here in this grotto for several years. It certainly outranks Trendelwyn in beauty and in solace. Does it? Thanen asked more out of politeness than anything. His thoughts were reeling. When you said the dragon is sleeping, in a way, did you mean, perhaps, that he's dead? The woman's smile was patient. No, good sir. The dragon is very much alive, and means you and me no harm whatsoever. He couldn't suppress a snort. Surely you jest. Not often, the woman said gently. Dragons are very misunderstood beings, you know. They don't like eating human flesh, as a rule. Oh, then what do they eat? Venison. Dragons dearly love venison. Wild pork is also enjoyable. Thanen's eyebrows shot up. Truly? He paused. You're teasing me. Not a bit. Don't you like venison? He shook his head. Too gamey. Surely a dragon would prefer beef or lamb. Too domesticated. Thanen huffed a laugh. Now I know you're in jest. Let me guess. The dragon told you all this? She only smiled. Would you like to come inside? It's quite pleasant for a cave. The waterfall roared, and Thanen eyed the shadow where the cave stood, frowning. I really think we ought to consider, retreating. If dragons aren't fond of human flesh, he shouldn't be too upset if we just slipped away, right? The dragon isn't within just now, Rinshera said. It's perfectly safe. She reached her hand out. Be brave, Thanen. If this dragon doesn't eat maidens, where are the ones who were sent before me, and after you? The mayor said they send one every spring. Rinshera's hand fell to her side. They left here unscathed. I showed them the way to another, less superstitious village. I will show you the same, but not today. It's too late, and we'd not make it before dark. But... Thanen glanced at the falls, then at her again. How can you stay here? She shrugged. I like it here. But you're all alone, except for the dragon, and this place is hardly civilized. Don't you despise the squalor? Rinshera's smile broadened. Come with me into the cave, and then ask your questions again, minstrel. She snatched up his hand and pulled him toward the waterfall. But... No amount of protesting would discourage the woman. Thanen soon ceased speaking, letting his curiosity rise to stand beside his fear. The closer they came to the hidden cave, the heavier the mist and the weightier Thanen's dread. He was trembling as he followed Rinshera along a narrow strip of path and across slippery rocks. There, the large cave mouth loomed, dripping with condensation. "One thing's certain," he told himself. "You'll truly have something to sing about before you die." Stepping under the rocky lintel, droplets pattered his head. Thanen drew a breath, murmuring a soft prayer, the second he'd voiced since leaving home at age 14, and both times in the same day. He'd prepared himself to be a feast, whatever the woman's claims to the contrary. The cave was a tunnel, only wide enough for a dragon of a small size, unless there was a larger back entrance somewhere among the cliffs. The light from behind Thanen began to fade, and he stepped more carefully in the growing shadows. Cool air wafted up from the darkness ahead. Rinshera tugged him around a gradual bend, and then light twinkled before them. The glow increased, and before long, Thanen could make out the lichen-covered walls and the grit under his feet. Whatever the source of light, it was better than a torch. His sense of dread mounted. Soon the tunnel gave way to a circle of brilliance. Squinting, he tried to see into that dazzling light, while Rinshera pulled him ever nearer to it. This is it, the light people see when they approach death. Somehow, he was less afraid than he thought he'd be. Terrified, yes, but still coherent, not a babbling fool. His mother had always said he was the latter. Rinshera glanced back at him, her eyes shining with joy that rivaled the golden sheen. Golden sheen. Of course, he was entering a dragon's horde. Something inside him ignited. Thanen's step quickened. Rinshera caught his enthusiasm, or he caught hers, and they ran into the circle of light. There, in a vast space that should be nothing but stone and damp darkness, gold and gems spilled from piles and mounds. The treasure twinkled under the influence of some ethereal power. The sun couldn't touch this place. Glorious! Thanen shook his head. Astounding! He could think of 100 more words, but nothing did justice to the sight before him. Thanen thought he knew wealth when he walked the paved streets surrounding castle walls, or peeked into the windows of upper-crust shops, or smelled the divine aroma of succulent feasts. But those were nothing to this staggering sight. There was enough gold here to buy the whole of Lintha, and the merchant guilds would set a hefty price indeed. "Do you like it?" asked Rinshera, beaming. His jaw was hanging open. Thanen shut it, then bobbed a nod. Finding his voice, he turned to her. "No wonder you stay. But aren't dragons stingy? Won't he be angry if you steal any gold?" Her smile fell into surprise. "Steal? I wouldn't steal. And the dragon wouldn't mind sharing. All of this is rightly won, in case you doubt that, too." He did doubt that, considering all the legends. Dragons took what they wanted, and humans could hardly stand up against them. Only a proper dragon-slaying knight stood a chance, and those generally lived in the far south. Lintha hired knights like ship captains hired extra hands, though dragons hadn't been spotted north of the Andeans since the Age of Dragons. It was only in small villages where dragons were still a problem, and the kings in their towers paid little mind to what they considered superstitious nonsense. Even Lintha only employed dragon slayers for the prestige of the thing. Thanen wasn't certain there really were any blooded dragon slayers about these days. That was the stuff of song and legend, his bread and butter. Until now. Now, he stared at a dragon's horde and wondered if he would live long enough to try singing about it. Rinshera caught his arm. "You mustn't tell the village about this." He snorted. "Why would I tell any of this to the people who sent me to my death? I'm still not convinced we're going to escape from that end, you know. Come to that, it's quite possible you work for the dragon and lured me in here to be his dinner. I wouldn't blame you, not if you struck a deal with him to keep yourself alive." She laughed. It was a beautiful sound like chiming bells or a splashing fountain, full of mirth. You do think more broadly than most country bumpkins, I will grant. Joy sparkled in her eyes. Yes, I think I will let you stay for a time. Come, there is a place to rest over here. She led him to a small, natural alcove on one side of the cavern, where the overflow of gems and gold coins created a kind of hedge, lending privacy. Within, bolts of fine cloth, silks, satins, brocades, damasks, and velvets had been half unraveled, creating a plush, wide bed of sorts. Thanen examined the alcove with grudging approval. It does look comfortable, especially for someone destined to be a snack. Rinshera laughed again. Rest, minstrel. The dragon will not harm you today. Looking around the mounds of glittering gold, Thanen had to concur. There was no dragon here. Yet. Nodding, he slipped inside the alcove and sat down on a bundle of velvet. I didn't think dragons cared for this sort of thing. He ran his hand along the plush fabric, drawing a pattern through the velvet. They appreciate beauty in many forms. They're not brutes, you know. No, he didn't know, and even the word of a beautiful maiden like Rinshera wasn't enough to convince him she was right. Every story spoke of how ferocious and bloodthirsty dragons were, leveling villages, gobbling up livestock, accepting maiden sacrifices, and terrorizing royalty. Dragon curses alone were enough to make the bravest knight second-guess his profession. Rinshera studied Thanen's face, then stooped to pat his arm. Relax, good sir. Not all legends are rooted in truth. Some are outright lies, crafted by fools, or worse. He feigned a smile. What's worse than a fool? Rinshera paused to consider. A clever man who uses fools to his own ends. Thanen couldn't argue with that. He curled up on the velvet, tucked a bit of damask under his head, and closed his eyes. Despite the situation, he found sleep quickly. He hadn't known until now that fear could exhaust one so utterly. Wake, O sleepy one. Thanen sat up and rubbed his face, blinking in the dim light. The scent of food, roasted pork and garlic, made his mouth water. He found Rinshera kneeling before him, clutching a tray heaped with the meat and some green vegetables mixed with garlic cloves. Somehow, she seemed to be glowing as brightly as the piles of wealth beyond the alcove. Is it morning? He mumbled, memories slowly settling into place. No, it's supper time. He nodded even as prickles of fear crawled up his chest and arms. He was still in the dragon's lair. When was the beast's supper time? Rinshera scooted to sit beside him, proffering the tray. Eat hearty. So I can be fattened up? He asked, with a quaver in his voice he didn't like. If you wish, she said pleasantly. She smelled better than the meal, like lilies and moonlight, pretty enough for a song. He basked in the perfume for a lingering moment, then tucked into the pork, grateful she was as skillful a cook as she was a joy to look upon. Thanen had little experience with women. Unlike most minstrels he knew, he'd avoided entanglements with the fairer sex, afraid to lose his heart. He'd once guarded it poorly, as evidenced by a past fondness for a mother who only cared what he could do for her. No sense in trusting anyone else after that. Even so, he liked what he saw in Rinshera. She was lovely, not only for the quality of her pale skin and luminous hair, but from the brightness that shone out from her sapphire eyes. There was kindness and wisdom bursting from her soul, promising a wealth of laughter and conversation, of wit and wonder. She was like a star standing against the darkness of the world, and Thanen longed to know her better. But that was dangerous. Rinshera turned those brilliant eyes on him. Tell me about yourself, Thanen. He shouldn't. He wasn't a fool. Swapping life stories was a step toward connection, and he couldn't risk that. But then, he was doomed to die, wasn't he? Before he could answer his own question, He found he'd cracked his heart open and spilled out his secrets. He told Rinshera about his cruel mother and indifferent father, and of running away from home, then about his dream of traveling the world. He even told her about seeking the song of Sirenhaya. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Well," he stumbled over his thoughts. "Do you believe every person has their own inner song, the way the Fae claim?" "Ah, yes, I do. You mean to suggest the world has a song of its own, too?" "Yes, exactly." He was relieved that she understood. "When I was very young, I thought I heard it once. I'd gotten myself lost in the woods behind our cottage, and a fierce storm rose up, causing a flood, so I climbed onto a fallen tree. The water kept rising, and I truly thought I'd drown, but then I heard this voice singing. I dragged myself through the sheets of rain until I found a cave not unlike this one. It was strangely warm, and the song filled the cavern, ringing out like pealing bells. I've never heard its like since. I stayed in that cave until morning, transfixed by the melody, though I couldn't understand a single word. When dawn came, the storm died, and I made my way home. Somehow, I wasn't lost anymore. I credit the song for that, the Song of Sirenhaya." "Was your mother relieved when you made it home?" asked Rinshera gently. "I don't know. She walloped me a good one." He tried a laugh, though he winced at the sting he still recalled. "Maybe that's the only way she knew how to show her worry, but I don't find that acceptable, and that's why I ran away." Rinshera nodded thoughtfully, rubbing her thumb along the shimmering threads of her gown. "I do believe this world has a song. Indeed, all living things do. A gifted minstrel captures bits of these songs to make their music." Thanin's shoulders fell. "Yes, I'm afraid you're right." She eyed him curiously. "Why so downcast? You claim to have heard the song of the world. Does that not signify that you are thus gifted?" "But I've written no song from that music. My original pieces are never well received. I can only sing the music of the great minstrels before me if I want any coin for bread." Rinshera offered a derisive snort. "It's not your fault that humans have no taste. Wait until the dragon hears your music. You'll have an honest answer then." Her lips lifted in a kind smile. "In fact, why don't you play something original right now, Thanin? Let us see what you are made of." He flinched back, his heart skipping in his chest. "Right now? This moment?" "When better?" "But I—" "You are a minstrel, aren't you?" "Well, yes, but I usually have an audience of many. Somehow, it's harder playing for one." "Very well. Pretend I am many or not any at all." He blinked at her, aware of his lute resting against his thigh. Clearing his throat, Thanin mustered his courage. He wasn't usually nervous about singing. It was his one joy in life. But Rinshera was watching him with her lovely, steady eyes, and her perfume lingered around him, more intoxicating than the strongest ale. She'd asked him to sing. He set aside his half-eaten dinner, plucked up his lute, and fingered the strings. I do have one finished song I'm half proud of." She only nodded. Keeping his eyes fixed on her, he struck the first chord, then began to sing. "I know a place where the lost wander far, traipsing through fields and over the sea. They cannot go home, they cannot be free. They roam o'er the world, a sorry sight indeed they be. I know what they seek, I know what they crave, hearth and rug, and a welcoming heart, a place where they truly can be. He let his fingers rest on the strings while the last note of the song echoed off the cavern walls. The mounds of coins hummed. It wasn't the song he most wanted to sing, but it was the best he'd managed so far. Rinchera sat still for a long moment, plucking at his nerves as skillfully as he had his lute. "I like it," she whispered at last. "You have a good voice, and it will get better with time and coaching." She tipped her head to one side. "I will teach you, Thanen." Without preamble, she began to sing. Her voice was high, clear, and powerful. The words she sang were foreign, not any language he knew, yet somehow he understood the music like it spoke directly to his soul. Understanding dawned slowly. This was just like the music he'd heard in his youth, the song of Sirenhaya. He shot to his feet, knocking aside his food, scattering it, and cutting off Rinchera. But you can't be." "Can't be what?" she asked, patiently. "The same thing I heard that day. You can't be Sirenhaya." "I'm not. But what you heard that day was another of my kind." Rinchera stood up and strode away from the alcove, out into the main cavern. She tossed her long hair behind her shoulders, then kicked away a stray gem which rolled into a pile of its kin. "Brace yourself for a shock, Thanen." He tried to brace. He really did try. But when Rinchera transformed from a beautiful, ethereal woman into an enormous, fire-breathing dragon with rippling scales of platinum and a glittering mane of yellow, he simply couldn't help himself. He fainted dead away.
I hope you enjoyed listening to The Minstrel and the Dragon Part 1 by M.H. Woodscourt, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. If you want to read more by Woodscourt, go to mhwoodscourt.com to find more of her books. She has fantastic Noble Bright fantasy books and short stories, and I highly recommend diving into any one of her stories. If you enjoyed listening to Paeter narrate the story, you might also enjoy listening to his audio dramas at spiritblade.com or his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. If you're not already subscribed to Finding Fantasy Reads, make sure to find the little subscribe button on your app of choice. Subscribing lets you automatically download new episodes as they come in, but it also helps increase the podcast's visibility on podcast platforms, which helps both authors and listeners find the show. Long story short, it means the podcast can continue to give you more short stories for even longer. As always, I will have links for all the sites I've mentioned in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.